one more edition of our webinars in the COVID-19 series. Thank you very much for joining us today. Today we are discussing about the e-learning in the post-COVID era. First, let me introduce our panelists today, and then we will proceed with the discussions. Today we have with us Mr. Deepak Shetty, IRS retired. He was a former secretary to the Government of India and former Director General of Shipping. In his earlier stint, he was the Joint Director General of Shipping and also Additional Secretary to the Government of India. Then we have Shantanu Bhatkankar, who is the President of Association of Multimodal Transport Operators of India, AMTOI, and also Managing Director of ATC Group. He is also the Chairman of Protomatic Containers Private Limited. Then Vishal Sharma is the Chief Executive Officer for India and Indian subcontinent for DB Shankar. He was earlier CEO of Damco for India, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, and also a CEO of Gateway Rail Freight Limited. Then we have Ms. Monal Srivastava, who is the Director on the boards of CRIPCO, Rail Infrastructure, Continental Warehousing Corporation, and DP World Chennai. She has more than 20 years of leadership experience across operational and group level strategic HR and IR for organizations like DP World, Godrej High Care, Tata Capital, and UTI Mutual Fund. Then we have today's moderator, Sanjay Tiwari, who specializes in turnaround management of businesses. He is the founding partner of 21st CC Education. His earlier assignment was with Merck's Line as head of implementation at Merck's Trade Finance, and also he was head of sales in the Merck Group. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining with us. We have really an esteemed panelist with a very diverse background and who are very passionate and focused on education in our sector. First, let me give my take and then hand over to Mr. Sanjay Tiwari for taking the proceedings forward. We all know by now how the coronavirus pandemic has changed the way we work. This is a new way of working, which could be a blueprint for a long time to come. Even before the current crisis, changing technologies and new ways of working were disrupting jobs and skills of what employees needed. In 2007, McKinsey Global Institute estimated that as many as 375 million workers, or 14% of the global workforce, would have to switch occupations or acquire new skills by 2030 because of automation and artificial intelligence. The coronavirus pandemic has made the question more urgent. Workers need to figure out how they can adapt to rapidly changing conditions, and companies have to learn how to match these workers to new roles and initiatives. In this backdrop, today we'll be discussing the changing scenarios of learning and skilling. Now I request our moderator, Mr. Sanjay Tiwari, to take over the session and conduct the webinar discussion. I will step aside for some time and rejoin towards conclusion. Thank you very much.
Mr. Amsar, I just want to ask before I get into the slides. Can I just ask the different team members to just introduce themselves? And I have a couple of specific introductory questions for them. Monal, I'm going to start with you. I think you're unique in this gathering because you're one of the people who's actually implemented a whole e-learning program at DPW. So what was one of the main reasons for you to even embark on that journey at DPW before I get into the main presentation itself?
Thanks, Sanjay. DP World always, Sanjay, has been known to be a learning organization. In addition to that, since we are in a rapid growth path and we've added new companies, more than 5,000 people into our fold in the last 2 years, one of the challenges that we were facing is to get people out for training and skill building. And therefore, one of the things that we could think at that point in time was to introduce e-learning. E-learning platform as a platform has already been there in DP World, but we gave it a new form and shape by introducing mobile learning. And we started with safety programs, refresher courses, a program on our founders principles. So these were certain things which were very easy to go live, and people could then adopt to it at their own pace. And they did not necessarily be taken away from their regular routine. That particular journey that we started around 6 to 8 months back has really been very, very handy in today's time, because we were already on that platform, and it's just now at this stage we are building. So that's how it all started.
Right. So it's coming in handy for you at the time. You obviously couldn't have predicted this, and if you could, you should have told us, but you didn't know this was going to happen. Right. Great. Did you have to do a lot of internal selling in the organization when 12, 18 months ago you decided to go in for this kind of e-learning? Was it difficult to convince some of your colleagues?
Not really, because certain programs, the adaptability and adoption is easier. End of the day, it's very difficult to replace a face-to-face learning initiative, because it has its own set of advantages. But if you start the journey with programs which are low risk and which are easy to roll out even on a mobile or a e-learning platform, then adoption is not a problem. We actually did not face. In fact, people were very appreciative, and we got a good response from our people, because it also gives you an opportunity to take it on as and when you want to. So there's a catalog.
It's self-paced.
The catalog is available, and then it's up to you when you want to register and when you want to take it.
Yeah, great. So thanks for those opening, setting the stage remarks, Mona, and gentlemen. I'll come back to you in a minute to ask for your opinion. Mr. Ramprasad, could you? I can't see the media. Do you mind just? There we are. Presentation up. So I'll take the audience through a couple of the slides that are on here just to set the stage after what Monal shared with us. Title of the presentation is Welcome to the New Abnormal, and everybody knows what the black swan symbolizes. Certainly, Vishal, you and I were talking about this a couple of weeks ago. If you've read the book Black Swan or Anti-Fragile, it says, be an agile person, be an agile organization, be an agile country if you want to survive a black swan event. And a black swan event is something that is not meant to happen and happens every once in a while. And Vishal and I were talking, came to the conclusion that this is not a black swan event, this is the black swan event. This is probably worse than what many of us could have envisaged would happen to us. And as a result of it, all businesses will have to rethink and are rethinking their business models. Anybody who's out there saying, no, I'm going to continue as is fibbing. Everyone is either finding ways to become more productive or save money, make less cost in order to be more lean and agile in the times that are to come. And certain industries, we know that, like travel, hospitality, will undergo very, very systemic change in years to come, right? And the two key questions that I would like to get the panelists to talk about in a short bit, in addition to what Monal just said, two things. A, how do we get and help companies to get and retain the right people? Is it still an important question? Or are companies saying, no, my current teams are good enough and I've put a freeze on hiring and I don't need to worry about new talent? That's a question, Vishal, that I'm going to come back to you with in a few minutes as well, and Shantanu. Or the other question is, what perspective can we offer young people who are coming into the market today, people who are about to graduate in June or July or a year from now? What can they expect from the Indian or the international labor marketplace? And how can they learn about this industry if we can convince them to come into this industry? For years, we as industry leaders have said we need to attract new talent. Are we serious about this? And if so, what is it that we can do to make available for them? So those are some of the key questions that I have. And before I go on to the next slide, Vishal, where do you stand on that first question? Is it still a concern for us to get new people? Or are you saying things are okay as is, and I'll make do with the people that I have?
So I think that I would say that the COVID crisis, terrible as it is, for people in the logistics industry has come at a time where, if I look at my own organization and the sense of pride that the organization feels as being part of an essential services and being able to contribute to society. And if you were to just use Google Sense or whatever, the word supply chain and logistics is probably the second most used word after pandemic, because everything around the world right now is how, from an economic point of view, supply chains are broken and logisticians are back in, or for the first time really, in favor. So I would say from an industry point of view, if there was ever a time to be an attractive place to acquire, to get access to good talent who also wants to be part of an exciting industry and contribute, I think the logistics industry offers a tremendous opportunity right now. If you had asked me this question a few months back, I would have told you that yes, it's not that easy. It's not seen as a glamorous industry. It is, there are many more industries that are seen as more glamorous or sunshine, right? But I think the current crisis has really brought the skill sets up to the fore. So I see a ray of optimism and hope that as an industry, we will be able to attract talent from far and wide going forward.
Great perspective and interesting point. Thanks for making that. And you're right. I mean, we even had the Prime Minister in his last speech to the nation talk about the global supply chain multiple times, right?
Exactly.
I spoke to somebody the following morning and I said, what did you think of the speech? And he said, I'm just happy he kept saying supply chain all the time, So needless to say, this was somebody from our industry. So you're right. I mean, it's become front and center. Great perspective. Yeah, thanks. Mr. Shetty, a question for you. So, how do you view the prospect of recruiting people for this industry in the months and years going forward? You've worked in various senior government positions. Mr. Ramprasad just said you retired as a secretary to the government of India. And if you had to advise young people coming into the industry today, and you've been DG shipping, would you advise them that this is a good industry to come into? Do you share Vishal's optimism?
So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Sanjay, for that poser. The way I see it is that I largely tend to concur with the other panelists. In the immediate term, I guess there is bound to be some disruption. But in the medium to long term, given the imperative nature of this industry, that it is so intrinsic to the movement of EXIM cargo and also the flying of goods along the Indian coast, and the fact that there are no alternative mechanisms for movement of cargo in bulk or in volumes, which only perhaps the shipping industry is well placed and has been on a continuum from ages and time immemorial. And I see that happening probably for several decades ahead. I'm robustly optimistic that things will look up and that reliance on shipping, which is the maritime sector, and its allied logistics supply chain networks is only going to gather pace in the months ahead. But so in these circumstances, I perceive that this would be just about as opportune a moment for budding talent to perceive and look at this industry very optimistically and hope that this will play out very, very well in the months and the years ahead. But as I said, disruption is the name of the game for the time being, but it's only a matter of time before revival happens. You see early signs of there in the US and the European continent as well, where things seem to be getting just a wee bit on track for movement, and hopefully
yeah, great. So thanks for that perspective. I'll come back to you in a few minutes, Mr. Shetty. So I'll go on to the next slide, and a question for all of ourselves to consider. And Shantanu, I'll come to you for one of these questions in a minute. What options do we have? So option number one, don't bother to educate people because they leave anyway. And it's something that many of us have heard many, many times before. We can't afford the cost of training. It's too expensive. And certainly online learning is not recognized. It's too complex. So don't bother investing in it. That's one side of the equation. And you can see that I'm practicing my Arnab Goswami skills here. The other side is, every dollar invested in safety gives a return of $2.20. And Monal, it's a colleague of yours who shared that example with us. What someone earns is not interesting. That's something that I'm often very fond of saying. It's the output value that person or he generates that is of value. So how can we help somebody maximize that output value? And the best training, and I think the hospitality industry is a great example of this, the best training is continuous. It's ongoing. It's not something that happens once a year at some company resort, but it's something that happens on an ongoing basis. So, Shantanu, which one of these two camps would you fall into?
Well, to begin with, not just for semantics, but I would say this is more of a black swan reaction rather than black swan event, because epidemics and pandemics have been there in past and they will occur in future. This time the reaction of the world and governments was very different. Second, I would say a lot of things happen due to compulsion. Compulsion facilitates. Like a lot of digital transformation will be facilitated by compulsion. Similarly, work at home became a compulsion just now and people adapted to it quite well. We have learned what we can do from home and perhaps do it better and what we can't do. So there has been a good learning on that front. Now, coming to camps, yes, it's difficult to belong to one camp, but I can share opinion very frankly rather than being politically correct. In a large forum, people like to be politically correct, but real life experiences, when we invest on people on good education, expensive education, or one which is mandatory in the industry. For example, the basic and DGR training of airlines, you pay fees and actually you are facilitating departure of that person because he looks for a premium, and on an average we have seen in 6 months to 1 year people are gone just by training them. Two, whether we have a choice. Well, I belong to school which believes we don't have choice but train and train even more. So that's where we will have to have some understanding within industry, and what I have seen is even if we have understanding within the industry, and this is what's happening in India, but it happens in Europe and America also, it is the customer who pick up the trained people. It's not necessarily across the industry. So yes, there is a challenge. Maybe government helps us with some kind of enforceable bonds, because courts have always held invalidity of bond and they have said right to livelihood and not allowed a bond to be enforced, and industry colleagues also have been a bit careless. But I believe the way world is changing, we have no choice but to educate people, train people, and people come with certain learning, and probably that's outdated in next 2-3 years, maximum 5 years. So this continual learning while we work is essential. It's essential in soft skills as much as it's required in the core technical skills of the industry. So I believe I belong to both camps, and in fact on the extreme end of both, you need training compulsorily, otherwise you just can't function. And two, there needs to be a need to retain people in spite of training. So I believe the current immediate times may not be too bad, because as companies are looking for cash conservation, we don't see that there will be a lot of poaching that's happening, and even the employees would be more comfortable to stay with people who are actually paying and continuing to pay salary. A known devil is better than unknown angel. So I think these are opening remarks. Back to you, Sanjay.
No, but great remarks, Shantanu. I think we have to quote you on this. I haven't read this in any of the evening or heard any of the news programs. You've called it a black swan reaction. So I think it's a brilliant remark. And ladies and gentlemen, you heard it here first.
Sanjay, can I very briefly come in, if it's okay with you?
Please.
Sorry. So I just heard Mr. Shantanu Bhatkamkar in his initial remarks indicating as to whether the government could look at enabling enforcement of a bond, as it were, in some form. Now, I would want to strike a note of dissonance here. At the end of the day, I think given the sheer business dynamics, you would rather have the government stay away from what it ought not to get in the first place. Strictly speaking, as you're all aware, in HR practices, it's essentially a contractual arrangement between an employer and an employee. I see no role really for the government to mandate an enforceability of a bond which has been entered into purely in the realms of the private sector. But clearly, I'm sure you're not envisaging a situation where you would want someone to be a bonded slave. That said, I do believe that any organization which is resilient, which is empathetic, and I would refrain from using the word sympathetic, which is empathetic to its employees, is caring enough to ensure that the overall ecosystem within an organization is so facilitational so as to be able to retain the talent. I'm sure there are attrition rates, which as long as they are within a reasonable bandwidth of anywhere from about 5 to 10% max, which is fine because the world is, very, very dynamic. It's in a state of flux. But so long as you're able to retain 90+% of your staff by virtue of your HR practices, your management style of functioning, which is more, which leads the way, and it creates confidence-building measures in the rank and file of the organization, I see no reason why one should be apprehensive of a mass exodus at all.
So thanks for those counter remarks, Mr. Shetty. I think appreciated and good point on the empathetic organization as opposed to a sympathetic organization. But it's good to have this healthy exchange. Let me just go back slides for a minute, please. So statement that I made at a conference a few months ago, I've lost a sense of time. But skill development is not philanthropy. So don't do skill development because you think you're being nice to people, but do it for actually, and that's the point I'm going to make to the business community who's on this call, do it because it's actually good for your top line. And, if you can get somebody to be productive from day one, as opposed to day 180, that's money in the bank. And at the end of the day, as hard-nosed as it may seem, as employers, we pay people for a particular output. So somebody who's earning X amount of rupees or dollars a month, we're paying them to effectively get 10X worth of output, right? And that's the math that goes on in our brain. And then we deduct the cost of infrastructure and cost of capital and all of those things. So if somebody's not productive for 30 days or 60 days or 90 days, think of the output that you've missed and, versus what you could have gained. And when you make this pitch to hard-nosed business people,
Ms. Monal Srivastava, did you have any internal selling before embarking on some of the projects? What are the nature of some of the projects you undertook in DP World in HR practices? Can you elaborate that?
So, couple of things on the learning platform, as I shared earlier. One of the things that we started was programs on safety. So in the current situation, on the ground safety training is a challenge, and therefore these refresher programs have really become very us. In addition to that, culturalization, programs on leadership skills, programs on time management. These are things which are short duration program, and if people and there are tips that you can give and which are very easy and handy for people to take up. So one of the things that recently we launched is a mobile learning program on time management, and you would be surprised that there was such a big response on this that we got. It was a phenomenal response. Even we were not a program which is as basic as time management. There would be so many people actually enrolling for that program.
Mm-hmm.
I would again come back to the same point that if it is a self-learning, if there's an internal need of an employee, and if then he sees an opportunity which is available, then you don't need too much of selling to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Monal, for that. Sir, this question is to Mr. Shantanu Bhatkankar. This is a question from one of the participant, Ashish. There will be scope of employment, but all that would be different skill sets. However, the number would be far less. Would the above scenario be a reality? What he says is, will digitalization reduce the employee count by killing more people into digitalization?
Well, as a scenario is emerging, digitalization or what we call I 4.0 or fourth industrial revolution is going to happen, and it will happen in many forms. It's not just one form. It's not just machine learning or artificial intelligence. It's not just robotic process automation and robotics for mechanized handling. But if we see historically, all these developments have always resulted in increase in employment. And just because efficiency improves, the organizations get stronger, the potential increases. The challenge, however, is reskilling the people and reskilling the, what you can call the top management also. Because it's not going to be a change that's happening on the level of people who work and the work they do getting automated or mechanized, but the business models are going to change. Our current business models are at best outdated, or otherwise they are fragile and broken. So we have to review and revamp the business models. And one of the proof of our business models being outdated is the long credit and the diminishing yields. The clear symptoms of outdated and broken business models. So if at all employment in a particular organization will go down, it's not just because of digitalization and work from home. It will go down because we have not been able to reinvent ourselves. Otherwise, digitization per se, if I look back right from the first industrial revolution, the employment and the trade and the economy will increase, and harder and more tedious and drudgery, what we call as, will be reduced, and we will have more challenging and more intelligent work. Back to you, Sanjay and Ram Prasad.
Anthony, you have a question on the fly from Ajay Achutan. After hearing Shantanu comments, I am forced to assert that we need to move up top management from command and control to connect and care, as stressed by Deepak Shetty. Would like Shantanu to clarify why the archived model is needed.
Well, it's always nice to be politically correct. Even when government comes out with trust-based laws and regulations, they are full of penalties, they are full of, I would say, even prosecution. Even if you take army, when army hires people, when they recruit people, there is a bond that you can't leave for 5 years, because you allow somebody to say there is a 3 months program in IIM Ahmedabad, we spend 4 lakh rupees, we give 3 months paid leave. Naturally, because of this education, the person has a better employability. Someone hiring that doesn't have to spare that money and time. So there is a demand. And fine, everybody who is capable of dealing with connect and care is welcome to do that. But probably it is easier said than done, I think. And I actually didn't want government intervention. What I mentioned is the courts are insisting on right to livelihood, whereas I am also equally able to share with you the Australian courts, the Dutch courts, and the New Zealand courts do honor the sanctity of bond. It's only in India the sanctity of contracts are not honored and they are very fragile. And I'm talking cases decided in our industry, cases decided in similar context that they have not allowed and they have not allowed to backsell also. So these issues do emerge, and if somebody can be better, good, we will be happy to change.
Thank you, Shantanu. Before handing over to Sanjay, I would like Vishal also to share his opinion on this ongoing debate.
Yeah, so I think, let me give an economic angle and not rather a soft angle that don't put a bond or anything. I think if you invest in people and you train in people, and I think the point of the presentation, people, employees, team members are more productive. So your return on investment on training is actually quite high. That's number one. And I'm sure that Sanjay will tell us about some studies, and there are different studies, but the exponential value of talented trained employees is it far exceeds the investment in training. That's point number one. Point number two is that well-trained people, even if they leave, go as good ambassadors of the brand because they talk well of the company that they have come from, which allows you to attract people much more easily, which means that you don't have to pay a premium to attract good people because people look at the entire package of employment, not just the salary, but also the training and the advancement and so on. There is a term that is used in HR terms called TRS, total reward schemes, or many different ways. So employees make that judgment that even I'm willing to accept a lower salary compared to the market from a market, but I get a lot more training and investment, right? So from an economic angle also, investment in training is actually good for business because while they're there, employees are producing more. If they leave, they go as good ambassadors. It allows you to access good people at a better price than market. So I mean, my view is that, and I think bonds, I understand what Shantanu is saying, and I wasn't aware that the jurisdictions have it, but I would wager that most of the progressive companies in those jurisdictions also may not be enforcing bonds, right? And I mean, as a personal, as an employee, I think bonds have a sort of a way of putting off people. So I think that's where I personally stand, that it's good economics to invest in training anyway.
I said skill development is good for your top line. It's good for your bottom line. This photograph shows, this is a badly, it's a slightly dated photograph, but it's an MD-11 aircraft, badly loaded. This is not an airplane taking off. If you look closely, this is an airplane that is toppled because somebody didn't know how to put the heavy cargo in the middle of the aircraft as opposed to all of it at the back. The aircraft's got it toppled. If you search the internet for images like these, you get tens, if not hundreds of them. And the employee loading that aircraft is earning a minimum wage, sometimes slightly higher. That aircraft on average costs $120 to $130 million. So when you can avoid mistakes, it's money saved. And that goes towards that return on investment that Vishal was talking about earlier as well. It goes straight to your bottom line. So either it's an improved top line or it's money saved and it goes to your bottom line. So I would, like to suggest, but again, I think most of us agree that skill development is fundamentally good for business. And apart from the brand value that I think Vishal brought up, which is a very good point, that people go as your ambassadors, and you see that with organizations like the Tatas, for example, that train people, or companies that I've been fortunate to have worked for, like Maersk or KLM. People talk about them years on because of the training that they got at those organizations. And Monal was just talking about DPW's attitude to that as well. I'd like to switch gears a little bit and address the students on this call, because unbeknownst to a lot of you, we have a lot of students on this call as well. They're future job seekers. They're at colleges such as NIIT University, in Nimrana who are listening in to us to try and find out what the industry brings for them. And the next couple of slides, I'd like us to make a bit of a pitch to them to say this is what it holds, although I think Vishal and Mr. Shetty and Shantanu have already spoken to that to an extent. The amount of money getting invested in Indian logistics is truly astounding. The government of India is probably the biggest, not probably, it is the biggest spender in India, averaging around $100 billion a year. On top of that, private equity, venture capital is spending a whole amount of money, and this is year on year. So the figure that's here is accumulated over a number of years. All of us who are in the business or have been in the business know it's a 24/7, 365-day business. Speaking to Shahzad this morning from Adani, and he said, all of our terminals have been going on all through this COVID crisis. In fact, all ports all across the world except Houston were running full throttle throughout this entire crisis, just to show that it's a non-stop business. It's a very dynamic business, and those of us who've gotten addicted to this business will tell you that no 2 days are ever the same. I don't think anyone ever goes home in the logistics business saying, I'm bored, and I did the same thing today that I did yesterday. In fact, I'm sure some of us would once in a while like a little bit of boredom, but it's not going to happen in this business. And the exciting thing for a lot of young people coming in is there are a lot of new business models that are being applied to the world of logistics. So if this was your image of logistics in India, and for many years it was, we thought, who wants to be a truck driver? Well, it's changing, right? It's becoming a very sexy, very attractive industry, and this is no longer just a fantasy. This is in some countries reality. But this kind of experimentation is going on not just in Singapore or the US, but it's going on here in India as well. And this particular slide shows some of the companies that have been funded by PE firms and venture capitalists over the last couple of years. If you can look at the upper left-hand corner, you see delivery, which I'm sure most of us who pick up packages from Amazon or Flipkart at our doorstep would know. But a lot of these companies, Black Buck Logistics, etc., have all been funded by private equity and venture capitalists over the last couple of years, many of whom have close to $1 billion valuation. So logistics is suddenly becoming cool. And Vishal alluded to that a little bit at the beginning. It was already underway. Now, of course, due to the pandemic, maybe we are more front and center. There's a lot of cool stuff happening from an investment point of view and also a technology point of view. A lot of blockchain innovation taking place in is taking place in logistics in addition to the financial sector. But it is an industry for which we need to be prepared. It's not an industry where you can actually just sail in. And all of us, Monal, you and Vishal, Shantanu, myself, who've hired and recruited people, I'm sure you would agree with me that if somebody has a prior knowledge of logistics or transportation, then that would be a pre-qualification. Would you agree, Monal? I mean, if you get somebody coming in as a candidate, somebody has some basic knowledge of our business, would you move them to the front of the queue or would you disregard that?
So thanks, Sanjay. I think Sanjay, prior knowledge, and this is true not only for logistics, but any industry. If you know the business, if you know the day-to-day, obviously the person is preferred if you have a identical skill set or an identical candidate available who's not from the industry.
Right.
But what I would also like to add today, as has been shared by you and a couple of our panel members, that there's been a huge change in the sector per se in terms of digitization, in terms of automation and tech. There's been today, if you look at a lot of organizations, disruption is something which is, so people are looking at disruptive ideas. And therefore, the appetite of organizations, at least I can say that about DP World, that the appetite of the organization to look at individuals who do not come from the industry has gone up phenomenally. Because these are the people sometimes who come in with fresh breath, fresh ideas, disruptive ideas, that helps the organization take a quantum leap.
That's actually a very interesting point. And in which domains, Monal, specifically? So just talk about some of the domains. Are you talking technology, for example? Is that a sector that really has your interest?
Yeah, so technology, even in basic operations, I mean, if you look at port automation today, there are a lot of things which are happening. Or if you look at organizations which give end-to-end solutions, the appetite to adopt blockchain is phenomenal. And therefore, or video analytics for that matter, if you use video analytics for your safety interventions, I mean, you look at any area and there are so many opportunities which are there, which can be just caught on and people can work on that. So while for your day-to-day operations, run-of-the-mill activities without demeaning any activity, you may still need people who understand the business, who understand that activity. But for you to move on to the next stage, I think people with fresh ideas, students who come in with fresh ideas, I think at least I think that the appetite is going up of organizations.
That's a great and an encouraging perspective. Quick question for you, Monal, then before we go on to the next slide. Ashish Seth from Sarjak Container Lines. Ashish, welcome on the webinar, has asked the question, with digitization or digitalization, actually, there will be a scope of employment, yes, but it will be for people with different skill sets. So that's what you're actually also saying, Monal. And the number would be far less. So do you see the amount of opportunities going down, the amount of vacancies going down in your organization because of digitalization?
Yes and no. Because what's going to happen is and if you look at the current situation and the situation that we have been in for quite some time in India, every organization is looking towards optimization. So extra headcounts sitting here and there are slowly going away, and every organization is moving towards lean structures, lean organizations. So there's been a reduction in positions, there's been a reduction in the opportunities that are available. What will happen with digitization is you'll need a different skill set. And that's also the opportunity available for our own internal employees if the organization has enough platforms to upskill their people so that they become more relevant for the kind of requirements that the organization has. I think with upskilling people, there would be opportunities available even for internal people. We don't need to really go out and hire. So different skill sets would be required, but I think parallelly people would need to upgrade themselves and become relevant for those positions.
Yeah. Which is it's a very good statement. So it's also about ongoing learning. So I think thanks for that perspective. You're saying it's not only about the new hires, but also the existing employees need to upskill themselves to stay relevant, right? Yeah. Which is a very good perspective. I'm going to come back to you later on once we're done with some of the slides. Ajay has a question for you, but the proposition here therefore is that skill development is not only key for us as businesses, as employers, but it's also key for the job seeker or the person holding a job, right? And I think that's your point. Training needs to be cost effective. Nobody's doing it for philanthropic reasons. And we should be able to reach people on a very large scale. Shantanu, I have a question for you. AMTOI, and you're the president of AMTOI, Association of Multimodal Transporters of India, just for everybody's benefit. And AMTOI has a footprint across India. Is that fair, Shantanu? And you've worked very closely with the government of India to also boost logistics and the presence of logistics in the northeast of India in particular. Do you see e-learning and distance learning and mobile learning as a way in which we could reach larger audiences in remote parts of the country?
Well, yes, you referred to a particular region, and Northeast was one of the focus areas of AMTOI, that there are opportunities in Northeast we are not aware of, and largely we found visiting there the people living in Northeast don't necessarily like to move to a place like Mumbai. So that work from home is becoming successful. I think there will be a big potential for Northeast and big potential for employers to hire people from Northeast and skill them in things which can be done from home and use some natural advantages they have in that region. For example, they are a lot more fluent in English. Their mannerisms or the way they speak is a lot more polite, which will be good for marketing and customer relations. So we can use this platform for proliferation of both education and employment creation. And I just gave Northeast as an example. We also find that generally there is a positive bias in favor of people boys coming from second tier and third tier city, because generally they are perceived to be more hungry. They are more eager to prove themselves. So I believe distance learning, e-learning also opens easier opportunities. Not that initially they didn't apply themselves well, they did have to come to a new town or a bigger town for bigger opportunities. Now they can prove themselves by staying there. So I believe these are all new areas which we will start discovering. Back to you, Sanjay.
Yeah, no, thanks, Shantanu, for that comment. And I also, you're talking about people at different stages of the development. Shireen Ali from WNS is on the webinar, and she's made an interesting point. She says we may also have a large population that will have lost their jobs recently, as well as fresh graduates who need to be trained. So by training them, we can give them an edge to try and qualify for jobs and get back into the marketplace. So that's something that we need to be cognizant of. So Shireen, thanks for that comment. I'll just go back to some of the slides to provide the backdrop, and these are examples of some of the mobile applications that 21cc develops, where we use actually a very virtual representation of, in this case, a port sector and a warehouse. And this is the interface. So people click on this and go in. So it's a fully gamified version. And this kind of approach can actually be used on a very large scale to teach people things, for example, about dangerous goods, which all of us who are from the industry know is a very important subject, but typically also one of the most dry trainings to go through. This is about a company called Schenker. I don't know, Vishal, have you heard of the company? Yeah. But actually, the slide, I do want to dwell on it for 2 seconds, because it was really something that we found very exciting in working with Vishal and his team, to take a warehouse and say, how does a warehouse actually make money? And the amount that we learned from talking to Vishal and his team, especially his operations people and his HR team, was incredible, to say that there are so many different revenue generators in a warehouse. And I think those of us coming, if you're not coming from the business, you just look at a warehouse on the outside and you see 4 walls and a roof. It's when you get in that you realize that no 2 days will ever be the same, right, Vishal? Because you're making money by square foot, or you're making money by cubic meter, or you're making billing by number of line items, etc. Vishal, can you talk a little bit about the kind of program that you and your HR team ran at Schenker to actually train some of your own operational leaders, and what was the reason for you to develop that kind of a program?
So I think thanks, Sanjay, and first of all, thank you for the partnership that we had to build that. I mean, the fundamental point was that in our warehousing business, or in any other company's warehousing business, or contract logistics business, the warehouse managers are where the rubber hits the road, so to speak, right? If you take an army-like situation, they are your captains, your sergeants on the ground. These warehouses tend to have, we don't realize, but they are like mini businesses. Some of these warehouses are 2 lakh square feet, 3 lakh square feet, obviously bigger also around the world, and also in India now, bigger facilities are coming up, and our facilities are, for instance, becoming bigger and bigger. And they can easily have up to 200 people in there, sometimes even more. So it's like a little manufacturing unit, if you think about an SME. Now, a business manager who runs an a manufacturing unit is thinking in terms of many different levers to deploy profitability or improve profitability, whether it's through revenue generation, through cost avoidance, improving efficiency. There are many, many levers, right? And our thinking was that if we treat the warehouse manager not as a warehouse manager, as an operational person, but as a business person, really, and build an education program that teaches him or her that what you're running is a multi-crore business, and there are many levers that you can deploy in the way you go about planning your business to improve your bottom line and building a knowledge where money is earned from, where money is spent, so that when they are taking day-to-day decisions around operations, they are able to improve their business, and they're able to improve the bottom line. And so that was the fundamental thinking behind to train our warehouse teams as business people. And I mean, and I suppose the approach we are taking in the business is that no matter what level you are in the organization, if you have a understanding of your role in improving the business and its financial impacts, then you can influence that by taking actions accordingly. And so therefore this training that your team helped develop was part of improving that knowledge. So yeah.
Great. Thanks for sharing that example. I mean, because indeed but I've said this to you one-on-one as well. It's one of the best examples of sort of in-house development of a team that typically organizations wouldn't look at, to take operations managers and really position them as business leaders. I want to take a look in a minute at some of the questions. Shantanu, you're attracting some interesting questions from the audience, and I think we're also coming up to the hour, so let's go to them in a minute. My colleague at 21cc coined this term to say skills are the new currency, and therefore I'm giving credit for it, because I think but also visually it's a great image, right? Because the more you get skilled, the more you're able to actually trade them for a raise or a better position or enhanced jobs in the company. Let me come back to this in a minute. So let's take a couple of questions from the audience. Shantanu, there's a question for you from Vinod Sharma, and the gist of the question is basically that since so much of what we do and have traditionally done in logistics is moving to an e-environment, if I understand it correctly, it's being, including the government's moving a lot of stuff e. What will the employer do, and what do you see as a change for a lot of the ground field staff who are currently moving deliveries from a CFS to an ICDS, etc.? Is there going to be a big transformation for people such as these? Do they need to reskill themselves in order to stay relevant in the years ahead?
Well, as I understand, we know the question deals more with the business rather than the skills of people. And with government moving to e-governance, there is a big possibility of disintermediation, like it can be directly tied to this. And there is a big strides that are taking place because of machine learning and artificial intelligence. Particularly machine learning knows no bounds. Like one of the big skills, which Vinod Sharma is a custom broker, and one of the big skills is classification of goods. There was a trial that was held for classification. There was 20 years experienced customs officer, 20 years experienced trade, means it could be an exim professional or a custom broker, and machine. They competed. And the results were the trade experts were right in 54% of cases, custom official was right in 76% of cases, and machine was right in 94% of cases. And machine will improve with time, whereas humans have limit. So it's not just limited to the delivery and the out of charge being automated. It goes beyond that something which we considered an intellectual ability. So businesses, as I said, our models are outdated and in fact they are broken. We have to engage with customers to understand better relevance of our service offering. And if you engage with customers and ask them what are the key areas where they have challenges, you will easily come to know where you can pitch. Of course, your old skills are irrelevant. If you were a bullock cart operator, bullock cart, and then you move to a Ferrari and then you move to an aircraft, the skills you will require are going to be different. And essentially, we found that one area where customers can get significant help from logistics service providers is in their planning needs. Particularly if we can work on proactively planning their dispatches, like Amazon has been successful. Like if they have a pattern of somebody buying something, they keep the goods ready very close to the dispatch point and they don't have to procure it from the factory once they get the order. So if we align ourselves so well with customers' planning and dispatches that we know their system as good or perhaps better, we will have a big role in their planning. So with time, we have to reinvent ourselves. And I can only see that if technology can be used for intelligent things by some people, we equally can use that. May not be using the same models we have to reinvent ourselves. And if we take 125 years of history of freight forwarders, the earliest article I have come across about redundancy of freight forwarders was 125 years back, whereas we see with time our relevance has only increased. So those of us who embrace change, we will continue to work. Those of us who don't embrace this change will have serious challenges. I think I have dealt with this question. Back to you, Sanjay.
Great. Thank you for that. Monal, a question for you from one of the participants is, how do you, in your learning programs, your e-learning programs, how do you drive engagement? So you talked about the time management course where actually you were very pleasantly surprised by the response. But overall, how do you drive engagement and how do you make sure your learning outcomes are realized? That's a question that Ajay has.
So very right, Sanjay. One of the biggest challenge of e-learning platform is to keep engagement levels at a consistent at a consistent level. And it is very often if you lose the audience in the initial few minutes, then it's very difficult to get him back. In a classroom program, you can still engage because there are activities, etc., that you can run. So one of the things that we have tried is not so much in the mobile learning, but the virtual programs that we are running on other platforms like Teams, etc., is to have a lot of role plays included in the program. Wherein we invite the participants to do those role plays. We cannot have big group activities, but small group activities can still be planned so that people are engaged throughout the program. Another thing which I have observed really helps is to have polls. So if you
have goals.
Yeah, so if you run questions or run polls through the program. Running a poll is not the right word, but run questions where people can give yes or no or a percentage, etc., as an answer. That itself engages the audience and they are glued to whatever is happening.
Interesting. So these are, is that because people are able to compare themselves with others or benchmark, or what do you think is the the reason for this?
So if you put interesting questions, say for example, very basic question, what do you think, what percentage of people do this particular activity in India? Say, very, very basic question.
Right.
People would generally put some numbers and then there could be some discussion. So that's a way to get the audience back to the context. And then you can again start the interaction.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. Let's take another question, or actually a remark. I think Shehzad, you had just placed. You just made a remark. Shehzad Athar of Adani says, post-pandemic, we clearly see technology as a big takeaway in the port sector, and we believe ports and logistics sectors will attract fresh minds in building the tech hub. Mr. Shetty, let me use that as a launching pad to ask you a question. How do you think the government's view of e-learning, e-qualification, etc., has it changed? Because I think a lot of people still say all of this e-stuff is great, but when it comes to certification, I still need that piece of paper. And I think a friend of mine, Radha Ramanan, was talking about it the other day about, you still need your DG training, still need a physical piece of paper. Do you see any evolution in the government's mind when it comes to those things, to be more tolerant of e-qualifications?
Sure. So let me just take you back in time. Just as a contemporary instance, it was only as of yesterday that my former organization and my successor, the Director General of Shipping, has issued a DG circular number 19 of 20, and I'm using this merely as a current illustration, where cognizant of the current ground realities, where, given the pandemic situation, which is likely to obtain for some time to come going forward, what the maritime regulator, which is the National Maritime Administration, has indicated in this circular is that substantively, almost all of the learning which others would be required to be imparted from a regulatory perspective on a classroom mode can just as well be now facilitated in an online mode. So, without compromise, and let me just go back a couple of years when I was the Director General of Shipping for 2 years in the years 2015 and 16, and I'm saying this with utmost due deference and humility. I initiated 2-3 programs which were the first of the kind by any maritime administration across the world. One was introduction of what we thought was going to be a game changer, particularly for the seafarers, where they need for a career progression their certificates of competency. And that's what I believe we were aiming to. So we said that let's move to the next level where we don't need to take these exams on a paper format, right? So what we did is we introduced a smart tablet-based experiment, and we tied up with a service provider who wrote us the entire architecture, the algorithm for that. And we fine-tuned it and vetted, did a beta version. And we came out of the proposition sometime in 2016, where we said that all the papers which are currently being written, be they objective type, the subjective type, or drawings and designs, we could fuse them all into the smart tablet. And within the given time period, with a specific color code, the examinee could write on that tablet. And at the back end, with cybersecurity measures, it would then get captured by the examiner. And he or she would use a different color-coded pen and would assess or evaluate that. And then that would be captured with absolutely no man-in-the-middle attack, so as to say, so that there was no intervention whatsoever. We then ensured that, this was viable. And what we did is we rolled it out for what is called as the near commercial vessel sector, the NCV segment. So we said, let's do the beginning. And then we launched this. And then the idea was to scale it up in the next few years for even the ocean-going carriers or the foreign-going carriers. So the idea was that the exams in the physical format that we knew historically would be completely replaced by a tablet-based smart way of getting assessed. The second element which we also introduced at that point was, this is again, we were very, very cognizant of the harsh reality that maritime education was deficient to a large measure in terms of the quality paradigm. And so to make good that, to compensate that, what we did is we sort of populated the website of the Director General of Shipping with the large volume of customized, very specific material in the form of an e-learning, which is available to all levels of seafarers, be they officers or ratings down below, and be they on the nautical, the naval architecture, or the engineering side. And they could access this for gratis All that they needed to have was an international database of seafarers, password and user ID, which was assigned to them for free, and that they could access this and get into this material which is available. And what we did was we made it completely interactive. We ensured that there was a lot of interesting subjects, interesting methodologies. We also built in at the back end chat sessions, which were with mentors on a live basis. They could engage these mentors, get a sense of where they were in terms of their preparations. The intention was that they could get prepped up for every level of certificate of competency exam as they progress in their career. So this was again the first of its kind which was initiated anywhere in the world. On the other side, what we did was we went in for a comprehensive e-registration of the entire COC exam process, where we did away with the manual interface, and we said you don't need to send any communication physically for registering yourself for the exam. You log in the portal, you get a date and a time of your choice subject to availability, and then you're good to go for the examination, which eventually we would ensure on a smart tablet base, which is non-physical paper format. What we also did was that, which was a sort of a second level, there are these oral exams for seafarers at every level. They need to come up to the Office of the Director General of Shipping. They are examined by a set of both internal and external evaluators. To enable this to be completely transparent and accountable, we installed CCTV cameras. There was always a general perception that the candidates were getting shortchanged, they were being subject to harassment in the form of extreme set of questions. So what we did is we said, let's call the bluff off on either side, both on the part of the examiners and the examinees. We will capture the entire proceeding of an oral exam through a CCTV camera, make available this footage to any examinee who wished to access it, and use it to take their appeal process forward, and to ensure that they got a fair sense of justice, which was then obtaining. So the idea was that what we also did at the next level, we introduced something called as a blended learning. We were aware that we had to work within the framework of the International Maritime Organization, which is the global standard setter and regulator for the maritime sector. There is the STCW convention, the standards of training, certification, and watchkeeping. That gives enormous flexibility to the maritime administrations of any jurisdiction to work around those common minimum standards. So what we did was that without breaching the letter and spirit of that, we said, let's build in these systems where we can transpose and have some elements offline while we continue to have some which are online. So that's known as blended learning. We introduced that as well. Finally, just to sort of pause at this point in time, we wanted to break the shackles or the dominance of the maritime training institutions and bring in a sense of transparency and accountability to the entire process. So typically what was happening is that there was an element of a rent-seeking behavior in the way, when the candidates went into these institutions, they had the rough end of the stick. We said, we will do a comprehensive inspection program and we will run it by third-party autonomous institutions, not by the Director General of Shipping, where various parameters would be assigned as to whether the maritime training institutions had the requisite infrastructure, we had the requisite logistics, the faculty, the academic course matrix, and the entire works, as it were. So for every parameter, there was an assigned weightage. And trust me, at the end of this annual assessment, which was carried out, all we did was we invoked this nudge theory. I'm sure you're aware of this Richard Thaler's nudge theory in economics, which is essentially a gentle means of having a persuasive influence. So what we ended up doing through this nudge mode is we put out all of these parameters in the public domain in the website of the Director General of Shipping, and lo and behold, the entire unmasking, unveiling, as it were, of the maritime training institutions took place, and every institution was literally, left open-ended insofar as an appraisal on all parameters. And believe me, in a matter of about 2 to 3 years, all of these institutions which are laggards literally fell by the wayside, starting falling by the wayside, for a simple reason that a prospective candidate, and mind you, the young generation is today very, very internet savvy. They're all, very much glued on to the World Wide Web. They are able to access these parameters and figure out for themselves as to which is a responsive and responsible institution, for instance, which provides C-time training, which handholds or mentors them for purposes of providing employment opportunities.
I think we just lost the connection with Mr. Shetty.
Sanjay, just a reminder, we have about 15 minutes, 17 minutes to
I
go.
think we need to, exactly. Thank you, Mr. Ramsad. So
there are some questions from the audience. Maybe quickly you can take them.
Yeah, yes, I will. So I see one or two that I would just like to put in front of the panel. Monal, there's one that has your name on it, literally, and it says, as your facilitator, it's from Swati Sinha, and as your facilitators move from face-to-face interactions to blended learning, like Mr. Shetty was just talking about, or e-learning, are there things that they need to upskill or prep themselves on? Can you talk to that for a few minutes, please? And Mr. Shetty, thanks for your update just now. I think we got the most of it, so thanks. Thank you. Mona?
Good question, and in fact, we are facing that. There were a couple of programs that we usually do as a class. Moving on to do it through the virtual platform.
We just lose Mona. I think the internet gods have a way of switching off whoever's actually speaking.
Sanjay, can you hear me?
From we can hear you. Okay, go ahead, Mona.
Okay. We are actually planning to redesign the program in terms of how do we bring in the activities that we had originally planned onto the virtual platform, and to run those programs, we intend to do a train the trainers themselves. So very rightly said, there would be upskilling required for the trainers as well to make them comfortable with the virtual platform.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Mona. There's a question from Kamal Jain, which, if you don't mind, I will just take a stab at, but he's asking, how can we make e-learning more effective for drivers, laborers, and delivery staff? Is English a barrier for e-learning for the people who speak vernacular languages? And I think it's a very fair question. In fact, somebody asked me the same question this morning. And yes, we have to make sure that e-learning and mobile learning is available in vernacular languages, so that can never and should never be the reason why somebody cannot consume. And I think, Monal, we've even spoken about that in the context of your workforce, but it holds true for all companies. So things need to be available in any of the Indian languages, Hindi being one of them, and Tamil, etc. So I hope that answers that question. Keyur, you have a question. I'm gonna put that to Shantanu, saying that very often the intermediaries in the business get blamed. So this is not entirely linked to e-learning or learning per se, but how do we make sure that, or how do we glamorize the industry so that people coming into this business don't just see it as an industry that gets beaten up? I hope today, with everything that the others have said, we've given it a bit more pizzazz, but nonetheless, maybe you can answer Keyur's question.
Look back, the industry has much higher status and a lot more glamorized than what it was in the past. It has been better branded than what it has been in the past. as far as fresh people are concerned, I think they have a big advantage in joining this industry. Perhaps many other industries have similar issues. Like old experience is no longer valuable now. Perhaps it is even irrelevant in most cases. So a newcomer has a big advantage of having fresh ideas, fresh mind. He doesn't carry any old baggage. He has little disadvantage of legacy issues. So essentially, I find that logistics sector, with the way it's getting branded and the size of logistics organizations also, if I look back 20 years, 40 years, 60 years, is much bigger. We are hiring more people. The offices are bigger. So I would believe we can perhaps increase the pace of industry being attractive. But already we are on that path. So we today don't see challenge attracting people. We will have always a challenge attracting talent, and that every organization will have, not just logistics. Because talent is always limited, no matter, we like to call everybody as a talent, and we can also say that it is up to the person who hires to identify talent and the person displaying, person who is getting employed to reveal his talent. So these are different esoteric issues we can discuss. But largely talent will be always in shortage and demand. Other than that, I think logistics will be increasingly attractive business.
Great. I think, Shantanu, that's a great note on which to end. So you've given us two gems today. One, the response to this crisis has been a black swan response. I think that was number one. And attracting people is easy, but attracting talent is the big challenge. So I think wise words and well spoken. And I think that means we have addressed most of the questions. And I'm going to hand over Mr. Ramprasad to you in a minute so that you can do our wrapping up. I want to end with a call to action because what can people do to actually get up and running, and what can you do as a next step if you haven't yet done anything in this domain? One is, of course, I'm going to do a plug for our own website, 21cceducation.com. You can go to portal.in. It's a partner company run by the J.M. Bakshi Group. They've set up a fantastic portal. I'm sure you all know the application and the site, but they have built learning into that, where you can access some of the 21cc courses, but also those of other companies. So they're actually creating it as a marketplace for e-learning. The government of India, NSDC, has something called a platform called reskillindia.org. And in fact, we will be going live on that shortly as well. But that's a place where you can gain access to e-learning. And the other thing that you can do is create your own corporate academy. So companies like ours, but other companies can actually have an academy up and running for you and your company in a matter of days. So there really is no reason why in this day and age, you don't need to be at the level of DPW or Schenker to run your own e-learning program. These are companies which obviously have much larger teams, but the barriers are truly very, very low. And to the students in particular, I would say get into this business, start downloading courses, and actually find out what this wonderful industry is about. So, Mr. Ramprasad, over to you to take us through the summary and the wrap-up.
Thank you, Sanjay. We had a very interesting discussion covering a very wide range of topics, I should say, and also active participation from the participants. It's very difficult to summarize the whole gamut of issues that we have touched upon. But to conclude, learning is a lifetime process. As an individual or for an organization or for an employee, learning never stops. Only it changes from time to time what we want to learn or what we can learn. And I think organizations have been realizing the need to create the skill sets required for the company to move forward and investing in employees. So in this background, this coronavirus or a COVID-19 pandemic is not a trigger. These learning and upskilling we have been discussing for quite long. Only this may be a moment of introspection for all of us to see what exactly we need to pinpoint, to focus for the challenging times, post-COVID scenario, what it would be. Because still, it is a gray area that we don't know how things would move in the post-COVID scenario. So that could be gray area, but otherwise the importance of learning, importance of skilling our employees has been there all around, and it will continue to be there. So we discussed about investment in employees skilling, and the government role in perspectives of skill building for the entire huge workforce, and how do we engage employees from time to time in organizations, and how do we create a brand image for our industry, which was earlier not so glamorous, but now with a lot of potential coming up, with a huge investment coming into logistics, the requirement for an able workforce for all of us to move on and plug into the 5 trillion economy that government is talking about. And I think pandemic has done a lot of good things to this industry. Logistics has been realized as a very important segment of our economy, because in lockdown, everybody was talking about moving cargo, moving people. So I think we got all the focus, all the attention that we have. Only thing is we need to press the right buttons and then move ahead. With that, I thank all my panelists for such a wonderful contribution to this topic. I thoroughly enjoyed, and the participants also have actually participated. And now I conclude the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.